I think of this guy, and they do bushfire management stuff, and he saw improvement over 12 months of like 200% growth in the business, and he saw his net profit improve from 8% to 30%.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in today's episode, I'm sitting down with Dave Jenyns, who is the founder of SYSTEMology and SystemHUB. Now, unlike, I guess, our other episodes where we're really focusing on large-scale enterprise with, people that I've been having conversations with have generally been from those organizations that are, 500 employees plus, thousands of employees, really sort of quite large organizations, and understanding how do they adopt this process-centric approach. I think what I realized is that how important it is for smaller organizations to also adopt this approach in preparation for scaling up and for growing. I think it's an important thing at any stage of a business's journey or life cycle. I mean, I think if we look at our own personal lives, we can see that every day we're following a sequence of tasks or activities, and whatever we're doing. When I woke up this morning, there was a sequence of tasks that I followed to get ready and to prepare myself for my day. So really excited for this conversation, because Dave definitely has a huge amount of experience in the small to medium size business space when it comes to this process centric approach or process style thinking. So I'm really excited for this. Dave, thanks for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, pleasure. Really looking forward to the episode.
So what might be a good place to start is tell us, I guess, how you first jumped into or ran into this area of business process, and take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
I think back to the very first system that I ever saw, which was one that my dad created for my brother and I when I was probably about 6 and my brother was 7. My dad created this thing he called the sheet, and it was basically a series of chores that we could earn points for, and over the course of the week, he'd add up all of the points, and then he'd have a legend on the final page of the sheet that would then calculate out how much pocket money we were going to get. And I remember that, like, I figured out how to play that game really well, and I maximized how much pocket money I was getting. My brother, on the other hand, he didn't like the sheet. He hated the sheet, and he didn't even sort of join in, so he didn't end up getting any pocket money. And it kind of stuck in my brain over these years that not everybody connects with the idea of systems and processes. So there are some people that will just jump in and go head first, and there'll be others that will be resistant. And part of this process, as you build a systems-driven company, is about identifying those people who are really going to resonate with your way of doing business. And then following that, I've had it so many times where I look back now and I go, just about every business that I've been involved in, there's been some form of system and process. I was in the stock market education space, and we were teaching people about trading systems, and that's all about following a set process to get a consistent outcome and remove some of the emotion in trading. I owned a rock and roll clothing music store, which we franchised. So we built it out with the intention of franchising it. So there was a head office manual. There were store manuals as well. And it was kind of like a rock and roll clothing music store with AC/DC T-shirts and Metallica. And we even had process built in there. Then there was a video production business where I didn't know how to do the work on the camera. So I had to build it from day one as a system so that I could have other people do it, because I wasn't the technician who could hop in on the tools. So, and then there was the digital agency. But all of my businesses, I kind of look back and there's just this thread of systems and processes, and how do we remove key person dependency? How do I get myself out of it so I can do the classic work on it rather than in it? It's always been there for me.
That's great. And why do you think? What do you think is the biggest struggle that people face when, I guess, building their business, trying to scale their business, but not adopting or not thinking through their business like like a process? How can I systemize this? How can I put processes in place? What do you think is, I guess, the biggest objection, hurdle, or barrier for people for that to click for people? You mentioned there that for some people it clicks, for other people it doesn't. What do you think is holding? Because I would say a lot of organizations, a lot of small to medium sized, don't have processes in place and systems in place.
Yeah. When we think about, let's say, smaller business, a lot of it comes back to where it all starts, which is oftentimes the business owner. The business owner oftentimes is this big picture thinker, a visionary, and they move quickly and they just get things done, and their attention goes to whatever is urgent and most important. And then oftentimes not a process person. And as the business starts to scale, sometimes they'll find the yin to their yang. That's where they might get in an operations manager who kind of, sits alongside them, and they're the one that brings in all of the systems and the process. But one thing that has to happen is the business owner, because they oftentimes are the leader, or whoever the leader is of the organization, they need to be all in on this idea. Whether they're making the process or not is irrelevant. Like, oftentimes I'll say the business owner is the worst person to be creating the systems and the processes, but that they're never above the law. They need to, when they're in the business, they need to follow the process to really set the tone for the rest of the organization. So a big part of that first challenge, at least with a lot of the businesses I'm working with, is getting buy-in from the business owner and then having them say, yep, I'm going to do this. That's where it starts. But then it filters down. It filters down to, department heads, and then it needs to filter down to the team members as well. There's a lot of little nuance, and everybody's different, and there can be resistance at different points. But generally speaking, if you start with the leader, move to that operations person, and then make sure we get buy-in as we kind of move down, that's a really important part.
Right. And what drives that leader to adopt this process-centric approach? Obviously, that for some it could be more market share, increase their revenue. For some others, it could be to improve efficiency or decrease waste. Yeah. Obviously, the last 2 years with COVID, it's been a very turbulent business environment. What are the main drivers and motivators you're seeing?
You definitely hit on quite a few. At the smaller end of the market, oftentimes it's also the business owner feeling overwhelmed and overworked, and the team as well. This idea of having key person dependency, and if someone goes away on holidays or needs time off, the work doesn't happen. And when they come back, they spend the next 4 weeks trying to catch up for the 1 week that they had off, because everything just banks up. That's a big part of it. The other one, which we talk quite a bit about, is actually exit, and thinking about what is of interest to a potential acquirer. And they don't want to buy a business that is heavily dependent on the business owner or certain team members, because what happens if they walk out the door? And introducing systems, process, capturing your way of doing things, best practice, is a way to de-risk for the acquirer, which actually significantly increases valuations.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously in adopting this process-centric or system-based approach to running your organization, there's got to be significant value there if done well. Do you have a couple of examples or stories or case studies you can share where, you've worked with an organization and their business has been completely transformed simply by understanding their processes, establishing systems and putting those things in place?
Yeah. One that really sticks out for me, it was a company called the Diggity Doggity Daycare, and they were a doggy daycare centre in Melbourne, Australia. And the lady had been in that business for about 13 years. And she kind of got to the point where she was burnt out, had a little bit too much, and then she'd started to think about exit. Now, she planned the exit over a couple of years. This is not like hey, I'm going to sell next month. And she started to think about, well, what's important for the acquirer? And then she started to document process and make sure that her financial performance was there, because they're really some of the two biggest drivers that an acquirer look for. One, is it going to work beyond the owner? Two, does this machine make money? And she worked quite diligently, and then she ended up selling out. Like, it was a great story. She ended up selling out to Pet Stock and like a big multinational company, which purchased her company with the idea that they're going to roll it out around Australia as like a franchise. And
right.
It was like the valuation that she got, because she worked with an exit planner, and the exit planner had brought us in to get her process in order. I mean, it's always hard to say exactly systemize and you will get 5 times earnings more, or, a multiplier of a couple, or whatever it might be, because there's oftentimes so many different things that are going on. But I've got loads of stories of whether it's, business owners. I can think of this guy, Gary from Eco Solutions, and they do bushfire management stuff. And he saw improvement over 12 months of like 200% growth in the business. And he saw his net profit improve from 8% to 30%. And then there's, I've got another one, Oh Crap, which is a dog compostable dog poo bag. And again, similarly, nothing happens in a vacuum, but his business has just gone like an absolute rocket ship. And he ended up getting the attention of the RSPCA, and they've come on board. And he cites, he says, look, without SYSTEMology, without having all of the systems in place, we wouldn't have been able to take the opportunity with the RSPCA, and it would have broken us, just because, the orders that they were putting through were too high for where they were prior to working with us. So, yeah, I suppose every story is different, and systems touches so many parts of the business, because it really is the foundation. It's the building blocks of your business. Your business is a collection of systems. So you just want to become aware of it and start going to work on those.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I've heard stories of organizations that have seen significant value in just documenting what they do down, just having that transparency before they've even tweaked it or improved it. They've been able to evaluate what they're doing and recognize, hey, hang on a second, why is there all this waste here? We can actually consolidate a number of these roles or tasks or activities and save us a lot of time, effort, and energy. Is the stories, your use cases, your case studies you're talking about, are they simply just by having that transparency, or is it also the ongoing improvement, optimizing of those processes?
So this is where SYSTEMology is a little bit different from the other process improvement methodologies that have come before them. Things like your Lean and your Six Sigma, which really is relevant for the larger organizations, and it's in the name. These are all process improvement methodologies, which assumes you have a process that you're looking to improve. Whereas a lot of, once you kind of down the smaller end, and if you haven't done much with process, you haven't yet identified what your way is, or your benchmark, or your starting point. And SYSTEMology is a way to go, how do we identify current best practice? Who in your team does the thing the best? And you can see tremendous wins in an organization by capturing that and bringing everybody up to that standard. And just the consistency. Where a lot of businesses go wrong is they can't consistently deliver the outcome, because some person does it this way, another person does it that way. Someone's got a process that's saved in a Dropbox, another person's got it on their desktop, and it's just one big hodgepodge. So a big part of what we do is capturing best practice and then centralizing that knowledge, and then using that as part of onboarding and training for new team members.
Yeah, great. And it's amazing when you're talking about that. There are many organizations that come to mind for me that are very, very large, thousands of employees that are probably in a very similar position, where they have their processes all over the place, stored in different areas. But for some of them, it's just stored in the mind of the people there. So, if they leave tomorrow, you've lost 25 years of sort of information there that you've got to somehow train up the next person. But I guess, is there when it comes, you mentioned best practices there, are there sort of best practice processes or best practice like framework or something for small to medium sized organizations where, there is a system that has been that has been tried and over a long period of time, and it is a good place to start at least and to adopt? Or is it all about sort of figuring out, well, what works for us and what do we need to do?
There's definitely some similarities with, like, when I look at, because I get to see, fortunately, inside loads of different companies. And then I start to look at, well, what are the similarities? What are the differences between those that are working that those that aren't? And if we think about your business as a system, and we think about the subsystems like departments, so sales, marketing, HR, finance, management, operations, and then underneath each one of those departments, there's probably a handful, if we apply the 80-20 rule here, 20% of the systems that are delivering 80% of the result for that particular department.
Right.
So oftentimes what I do is I apply that frame of thinking when we work with a client, and we have a look at, let's say, departments, for example. Oftentimes we look at this cadence of, we say, what are some recurring tasks? They happen with no set time interval. What happens weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually? And then underneath each one of those headings, we look to capture certain things. In some departments, there are, like you said, some crossover between business and business. I mean, you look at, monthly in the finance department, you might want to prepare a P&L statement that gets distributed out to your leadership team. On a quarterly basis, you might be doing your tax obligations. On an annual basis, you're doing your tax return. So there are a handful of those, and that is the same in many different businesses. Sometimes there's difference, in sales. Like, it depends, are you a service-based business? Are you an e-commerce business? Are you and there might be different ways of selling, like picking up a T-shirt in a rock and roll clothing music store and walking up to the front and paying at the cash register is going to be very different from selling, a big engineering mechanical piece of software that you're selling into some manufacturer. So that sales process is going to look very different. But all business needs to generate leads. All business needs to convert those leads. All business should be thinking about onboarding clients. All business needs to deliver the core product or service. All business needs to get them to come back. All business needs to hire staff. All business needs to know how to onboard staff. So there's a lot of like core principles to business. And often what happens is business tends to be like, the strength of the business of a whole is dependent on the strength of those individual components. Oftentimes where I see things go wrong is where they're particularly strong in one or two area, but they've neglected the others, and it's the other areas that hold them back. Like maybe their sales is super awesome, yet their operations and delivery has issues. And that's part of also the work that we do as well. Like where is that and where can you stand to gain the most from going to work on the system or the process? Yeah.
Okay. And is it about doing those incremental tweaks, those daily improvements, that sort of like ongoing work where, you've got the process participants or performers, the ones that are actually carrying out the work, they're identifying like where the bottlenecks are, where the long idle times are, where like there are inefficiencies in the process we can improve, where does that radical innovation come in, where over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of startup companies that have disrupted entire industries like your Ubers, your Airbnbs, all the big well-known ones. They obviously started off with radical innovation. It wasn't like they were in the industry for 10 years and then decided to tweak their way to something radical. They started off with a bang. So how do existing businesses right now that maybe are more used to that sort of incremental tweak, should they be thinking radically? Should they be trying to be super innovative and coming up with something that may even disrupt their own business?
I did some work with a gentleman called Michael Gervais. I don't know if you guys talk about him. He wrote the book The E-Myth, which is very known in that space. And I did quite a bit of work with him, and we talked about this idea of where does innovation come from. And he kept on sharing with me that idea of Steve Jobs, when he kind of went, he had the core business that he got up and running and got to a certain point, and then the innovation happened almost like outside and off-site and in another location where it was kind of separate. Sometimes innovation, particularly in an established business where you've got process and people are used to doing things a certain way, and that can hamper the innovation. Some of the other innovation you were talking about, these startup businesses that come in and completely revolutionize an industry, they've come in with a clean slate and they've got a blank page, and they can come in and start from the ground up. And it's easier to do that for them. And then they can jump 5, 10, 20 steps because they don't have to go through all of that other stuff, and they can leverage off and benefit from all of the thinking that's come before them. Yeah. So, I would say that type of innovation is best to happen outside of the machine. The goal of getting the machine working and profitable and getting to a point where it's efficient, and then that some of that money can be funneled off to set up one of these other things. And then once the innovation's happened, it can be brought in. That's probably how I'd approach it. But there's always people are going to have different ways that they do it. That's probably just the way that I've seen work most consistently.
Yeah, definitely. It makes sense to have, if you've got something that's working as a good baseline, as a good starting point, keep that running, keep that operating. I've heard even, especially now, we've got our largest organizations like the big banks, and that they've got their own sort of internal incubators where they're trying to foster a startup sort of culture so that the rest of the bank can operate as they have been doing, but they can also have these different arms, areas in the organization that are allowed the freedom to just think radically and look at what new technologies are in the world. How can we adopt things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and things like that?
And we see that a lot with, Google's another great example of that, how employees are allowed 20% of their time to work on their little crazy side projects that they will fund, and then they're effectively just watching. And when one pops, they go, fantastic, let's now consider making that a real thing and integrating it with the rest of our machine.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And when it comes to starting off, let's just say that someone's listening to this conversation now and they're thinking, we really need to, have more transparency and visibility into our systems and our processes. So we've got that baseline. Where should they be starting off? Should they be looking at their own internal, the business processes and what's going to optimize things for the business, or should they be looking at the customer experience and the process that they're putting their customers through and optimizing it for them? Or are those two things it's in the same basket?
So one of, I have a book that called SYSTEMology, which basically captures my thinking. The first exercise in the book is a thing I call the critical client flow. And it speaks with exactly what you're saying. It's like if you're thinking about, if I'm going to start anywhere, where's a great place to start if I'm not quite sure? And oftentimes, you listen to a business and you see where some of the pain points is, and that gives you an idea of where you need to start. A good thinking tool for this, though, is the critical client flow, where we map the customer and the business journey to deliver the core product or service. So it's just an A4 bit of paper. You don't even need to get the book to know this. You could probably follow along with the exercise now. You get out an A4 bit of paper. In the top right-hand corner, write down who is your dream client. The person who pays you advertised prices is a pleasure to deal with. You'd like tons more of them. They refer friends and family. They're just the ideal person. Next one down, we think of what is the primary product or service that you would sell to that person, which is the first thing that you would sell to them when they become aware of you, like basically a gateway product into the rest of what it is that you do.
Right.
And then after that, we map the journey. It's like a series of boxes on a page. You don't put more than 2 or 3 words in each box. And we start off and go, how do you grab the attention of that target audience? How do you handle the incoming inquiry? How do you then sell that person? How do you then, potentially onboard that person? How do you then deliver that core product or service? And then how do you get them to come back? And I keep it very high level. Like some of those boxes, you could imagine there'd be potentially so much detail under each box. Like thinking about how do I deliver my core product or service could potentially be a collection of a huge number of systems and processes. But just in this exercise, we keep it very high level and we do that linear journey because I know if you were going to start anywhere, like if the whole idea is that the business, you want it to be able to deliver your core product or service consistently without key person dependency, meaning that the machine just works and makes money, like that's a great place to start.
Yes.
And you can go further than that. Then the next step, once you've mapped that out, is you go, well, if we had 100 times more of these dream clients, what breaks first? Or where are the pain points? Where do things continually crop up? Our sales, we keep on dropping. Marketing's doing a great job, but when it gets to sales, we've got low conversion. Or maybe it's we just keep on getting these frustrating clients who are following us up and they're giving our customer support team a nightmare. And we'll go, oh, maybe you don't have the right onboarding process to set the expectations for the clients so they know what to expect up front, which then will reduce that. So it's mapping out the critical client flow first and then thinking about where the pain points are. That oftentimes is a great place to start. The bigger the organization, I do find sometimes we do make some different decisions, like larger businesses sometimes going to work straight in either the finance department or the HR department is also key. Finance department, if they're not quite firing or the cash is not quite right, like you've got to get the finance down. And then the other one, the HR, because the all resistance to this systems culture that you're looking to build will come from your existing staff. Any new staff member, if you've recruited correctly, onboarded correctly, there's no resistance because they just go, well, that's all I've ever known. This is the way that we do things here. So the resistance always comes from the existing staff. So we always, it's important to go to work on those recruitment and onboarding processes because we want to make sure that any new hires that like we don't want them contributing to the problem. We want to make sure that they're trained correctly from day one. So also that can be in another area, but again, it depends on the business, depends on the size. I find that's more the case with the larger businesses. Smaller businesses, we always start with the critical client flow because business is, cash flow and money solves just about every problem in business. So we can get the business making money, then that can then get diverted to solve the other problems.
Right. Okay. And talking about getting that resistance from the existing employees, how do you navigate that? How do you handle that? How do you bring these people along for this journey of this system-centric or process-centric approach when maybe for the last 5-10 years, the work they've been doing has just all been stored in their head. They haven't had to refer to anything. They haven't had their processes change on such a frequent basis.
There's a few things here and some suggestions. Firstly, as we said, all of that resistance is going to come from the existing team. So this is change management stuff. You want to, when you're introducing the change, you want them to see the benefit to them. This is not about improving the company's bottom line and meaning that their leadership team gets big bonuses. This is about how the team member can go away on a holiday and not have their supervisor follow them up and saying, oh, where's this client project at? I know you're on leave. I'm sorry to call you, but I've got to get back to this client. Like that's one way. Or another way, you say to team members, if you want to move up in our organization, you capture what you're doing, you delegate it to lower cost team members, and then that actually makes you more valuable for the team because now you can work on higher value tasks. also, like early on, depending on how far into this process you are, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but you focus on those that are going to resonate with this change and work with them first. Like, don't go straight to the resistors. Go to the ones that are going to be accepting of this and are going to start the process. Like, it's much easier to get that buy-in. Try and build a little bit of momentum. And there are other things, like there's never actually been an easier time in history to systemize a business and insert this culture than right now. Because of COVID, everybody's accepting of change. There's change at home, there's change in the community, there's change at work. So if the business comes around and says, hey, we know some of you are going to be working from home, there's a chance maybe your friend or a family member is going to get sick and you're going to need time off. We want to make sure that we've got all of this stuff dialed in so you can work from wherever. You can take time off if you need to, and it's not going to harm the business. So it's actually, blame COVID. And now is the best time to be doing this that I've ever seen out of any of the time that I've been doing this.
Yes, right. And I think that they're in pretty much everyone's daily tasks they're doing at their workplace. There probably is always going to be little elements that they do that they maybe wish they didn't have to do, those tedious, repetitive tasks, those things. So I think I like what you were saying about, pitch it to them, understand, well, what's going to get them the most excited about this change, because if it means it's going to improve their day-to-day work, as you were saying, they're going to move on to sort of those higher level activities. They won't get sort of bogged down into data entry or whatever the task it is. It's going to improve their experience at work.
Yes, 100%. Like it always just comes back to the individual, and everybody's a little bit different. And then it's the same when you start to come up against resistance. Like, there are going to be people that have created a little black box around them. No one really knows what they're doing because they feel like that provides some form of job security.
Right.
Shining a light on them by saying, what are you doing? Let's capture this system or process. Can feel quite scary for some people because they then feel like, ooh, you're going to know what I'm doing. Am I really performing to the level that I should be? Have I, I've made you think it's this epic task when really it's not. And that's, given me some flexibility and some security and a bunch of other things that they've held on to. So, and if I've always done it this way, why do I have to change now? Like, has it not been working up until now? Yes, it's been working. So there's a lot of that stuff that can bubble up, and that you need to think about how you're going to manage and work through that. Because if you're trying to introduce this stuff, there may be people, depending on how far into the organization you are, that if you had your time again, you might not have hired them. So what do you do now if they're there? And that's an interesting conversation. You want to give everybody the best possible chance to jump on board. Yep. There are times when performance management will step in to kind of go, well, this is how we're doing things now. This is part of the process. So that's where it can also get quite sticky.
Yeah. Okay. And when we're looking at the next, say, 2, 3, 5 years, and how, the business landscape is going to evolve and change and adapt, I guess what does this process-centric or system-based approach look like moving into the future? We've obviously got a lot of technology, more technology than we ever have, like new technology popping up each week to be able to manage the business activity, the tasks that we're getting done. And, probably the technology in my sort of realm and what's everyone's talking about at the moment are technologies like process mining and robotic process automation, these sort of technologies that large enterprises are sort of getting value out of. But what sort of trends are you noticing, and where is this sort of process-based management approach heading in the future?
I definitely feel like for a lot of businesses, step number one is figuring out best practice and capturing what you're currently doing. And that whole idea of optimization, it's actually the final stage in the SYSTEMology book, optimization, right, which is a little bit counterintuitive because a lot of the other process improvement methodologies, they start off by saying, let's strip out waste. Let's do, how can we optimize and get this just right? And we want the process to be perfect. Whereas I think what needs to happen is you capture a way down, which then becomes your baseline. And then you start to innovate on top of that, and you try and optimize once you've got a baseline. Right. And then you introduce in, everything might be done manually at first. Maybe it's, or you offshore it, or it's human automation. I love starting with human automation first to figure it out. Right. Once you go, this is what we want to do, then you carve off chunks and you go, oh, here's a piece of software that completely handles that chunk, or here is that, and that's my preferred method. I see a lot of people, I'll get wooed by the latest technology, the new whiz bang button I can press here and it's going to magically do everything for me. And they don't yet, they're not very clear on what the steps are or what the desired outcome is, and they're just going for automation's sake. Right. So that said, though, we're going to see a truckload more of this stuff. AI is just a rocket ship, and the speed of change in that process. And I know you deal with a lot of people, in manufacturing and like quite large organizations and things like that. And that whole robotics side of things, like I don't know much about that space, but you see some of the new factories and you look at stuff like what Tesla's doing and all that, and they've just completely revolutionized. And it goes back exactly to what we were saying about earlier. Elon Musk didn't come in with all of this legacy type stuff. He came in with a clean slate, with a fresh set of eyes, bringing his technology mind with him. And he was able to design that from the ground up. And he's been able to innovate significantly. And now it's the highest valued car company in the world, well and truly above all of the others. And how long has it been around? He's been able to do that because that innovation happened off to the side. So we're only seeing more and more change in this space. It's really exciting. I try and always caution, particularly existing businesses, just to kind of stick to the basics. Like I think of, my way back when I used to do a thing called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and we would always train the basics. There are certain fundamentals that you have to get in place, and there's no point in trying to do all of the advanced moves and the technical stuff unless your core solid base is there. And it's very much the same in business. Yeah, definitely. When you were talking about automation, I had a few examples or stories come to mind where an organization had jumped on some sort of automation technology because maybe they'd seen one of their competitors do it, didn't understand, what their environment was or what their circumstances were. But like the competitors, it was just, they're using automation. Well, we need to use automation now. And I think one risk there is, if you don't have, if you haven't got that baseline and you haven't improved on, these processes, you're only going to end up in a bad place faster if you're just automating these processes that, as you were saying, you mentioned a scenario before. If you looking at your ideal customer, if we had 100 of these, what is that going to mean for the business? Where are the weak points and weak areas going to be? If you automate without thinking through that, you're going to be having to deal with those at some point or another, but probably with less preparation and planning and foresight if you hadn't sort of got those foundations in place. And I see that particularly like for marketing automation, because that's a lot of, I see a lot of businesses trying to automate that side of their business, and they're using different software like Zapier to connect certain things together to talk to one to other. And they're trying to automate everything. And I've seen it many times before where they've just inserted it, and then it's harder for everybody else to debug when it breaks. When the Zap stops firing and it's stopping to push the lead into this other piece of software, and a month goes by and then the report comes out and everybody goes, oh, why have we had such a slow month this month? And then they realize it's broken. Like part of the process is going through this thinking to figure all of that out, to then be able to get your right dashboard in place, have measures so if things break, you can then debug. It's really challenging if everything's automated and you don't have the right metrics or benchmarks in place to then debug when a problem happens, or that debugging defaults to one team member, again, which is another problem. Like you need to think about how can we all be across what this system should look like and be performing like, so we can all watch out for when something goes wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's great. And for those people that have been listening to this conversation and they've been gleaning a lot. I mean, I've certainly been taking a lot of notes myself, but maybe they're in a position or their organisation is at a place where they haven't really got their systems down pat. They haven't sort of understood their processes or documented them. Where would you encourage that person go to learn more, to understand the path they should be taking? You obviously showed on one of your books before, which would be a great resource for our audience. But and I know that you've got a podcast there as well. But where should they go to sort of learn more about what they can do next?
Yeah, look, if you head over to SYSTEMology.com, there's a link through to a few of the things that you mentioned. And I think, if this is a podcast and you're listening, then you might like the audio version of the book. So SYSTEMology is over on Audible. That's a great place to start just to get the foundations right, because there's a few key things that need to happen with regards to building a systems-driven culture, because that's really what it all comes down to. Like, we'll talk about capturing process and documenting, but when push comes to shove, you can have the best systems in the world documented, but if the team isn't going to follow them, they're not really worth anything. So a big part of this is, how do we get buy-in? How do we get the team? The team will help to support what they've helped to create. So we want to get them involved in the process as much as possible. We want them to see the benefit for them. That's really a lot of the work that you need to go on. And we touch on quite a bit of that in Systemology. And then beyond that, you kind of just have to think about where you are. Like, if you have well-established systems and processes, they're stored in a central location, you've got metrics into place and you're monitoring like through some sort of dashboard, then you start to look at process improvement methodologies. But if you haven't yet done that and you don't yet have a way of doing things, that's really where Systemology can help support. That's how do you find your best practice?
That's great. That's awesome. Well, Dave, thanks so much for sitting down with me. It's been a very interesting conversation. And I think what stood out to me is how similar, or I guess the foundations, the fundamentals are the same the whole way, from a small business startup company all the way to a large enterprise. I mean, a lot of the topics that we're diving into today are very similar to what the large organizations are talking about, having that transparency, that visibility, understanding your baseline. How are you getting buy-in from all the various stakeholders that need to be involved in the journey? It's the same conversation. And I think whether, what I've learned from this conversation is whether you're just starting out in business all the way up to a large enterprise, you need to get these foundations and these fundamentals in place. It's only going to help the organization to continue to grow, to continue to deliver value, to optimize the way that the organization operates. So I just want to thank you for having a chat with me for the past 40 minutes. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate being on the show.